Hey everyone, tonight we embark on a journey back to ancient Rome, a sprawling empire of marble might and exceedingly pampered pets. You picture gladiators, senators, perhaps a toga or two, but do you ever stop to imagine the furry feathered or even scaly companions sharing the imperial bedchambers? Tonight you're slipping through the velvet curtains of history, past the stern busts of emperors, right into their private quarters, where their most peculiar affections often lay. It's a world brimming with bizarre bonds and unexpected tenderness, a side of Roman power you probably won't survive, metaphorically speaking, of course, because some of these emperors were quite the characters. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments below and what time it is for you right now. And if you're keen to keep unraveling these historical oddities and follow the channel to be ready for the next exciting parts. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the bustling heart of Rome, the air thick with the scent of pine spices and a faint whiff of something decidedly less pleasant from the sewers. But you're not here for the public spectacle. You're heading towards the Palatine Hill to the sprawling residence of Augustus. The very first emperor, the man who brought peace to a fractured world. You might imagine a stern, unapproachable figure, all gravitas and strategic brilliance. And he was undoubtedly. But even Augustus had his moments of softness, particularly when it came to a certain avian resident of his palatial home. Imagine, if you will, stepping into a grand room, sunlight streaming through a high window, illuminating intricate mosaics on the floor. In the corner, not a slave, not a consul, but a parrot perched regally on an elaborate stand of polished bronze and ivory. This wasn't just any parrot. This was Augustus's parrot, a creature of immense privilege, and as legend has it, surprising vocal talents. You see, during Augustus's reign, exotic birds, especially parrots, became a significant status symbol among the Roman elite. They were prized for their vibrant plumage, their ability to mimic human speech, and their sheer novelty. This wasn't merely a pet. It was a living, squawking display of imperial wealth and global reach. Historians still argue whether Augustus's parrot truly spoke with the eloquence attributed to it, or if it was more a matter of enthusiastic interpretation by the emperor's courtiers. But the stories persist. This parrot was said to greet Augustus with a resounding Ave Caesar Imperator Morituri te Salutant, which, as you know, is the famous gladiatorial salute. Now that's some serious memorization for a bird. Don't you think it's not hard to picture Augustus, tired from a day of governing an empire, returning to his lavish quarters, and being genuinely amused or even touched by this feathered orator? You can almost hear him chuckling, a rare sound perhaps, as the bird rattled off its well-rehearsed line. The sheer dedication to these animals is fascinating. It wasn't just about feeding them a few seeds. These imperial pets often had their own dedicated attendants, servants, whose sole job was to ensure their comfort, health, and entertainment. Think about that for a moment. Someone's entire career revolved around making sure a parrot was happy and well-fed. It really puts your own daily pet chores into perspective, doesn't it? No wonder they were seen as early animal celebrities, pampered to an extent that would make even today's most spoiled celebrity pet envious. They lived in luxury, often adorned with tiny, intricate collars or anklets, and were sometimes even taught elaborate tricks. This particular parrot rumor has it even had its own miniature gilded cage that was a work of art in itself, moved from room to room to follow the emperor's activities. You can almost feel the smooth, cool metal of the cage as you pass it, the parrot's beady eye watching you with an almost human-like intelligence. This fascination with exotic animals wasn't unique to Augustus, but he certainly set a precedent for future emperors. It spoke to Rome's ever-expanding power, bringing creatures from the far reaches of the known world back to the heart of the empire. And in a society obsessed with spectacle and status, a rare talking bird was as much a symbol of power as a conquering legion. The mainstream historical fact here is clear. Exotic animals, particularly birds, were highly valued pets among the Roman elite, serving as symbols of status and luxury. The quirky tidbit, of course, is the specific legend of Augustus's parrot greeting him with the gladiatorial salute, a story that perfectly blends the grandeur of the empire with a touch of the absurd. And that opens scholarly debate. It's precisely about the veracity and exaggeration of these anecdotes. Did the parrot truly speak? Or was it a clever courtier's embellishment for the emperor's amusement? As the echo of the parrot's supposed salute fades, you drift away from Augustus's opulent chambers, carried by the subtle currents of time to a very different kind of imperial retreat. Our journey now takes you south far from the clamor of Rome, to the sun-drenched, rugged Isle of Capri. Here amidst the sheer cliffs and azure waters. Tiberius. Augustus's successor spent the latter years of his reign. You might know Tiberius as a reclusive, often paranoid emperor, one who preferred the solitude of his island fortress, the Villa Jovis, to the political machinations of the capital. And it was here in this isolated paradise that he indulged in some of his most peculiar personal habits, particularly concerning his aquatic companions. Imagine standing on a precipice overlooking the sparkling Tyrrhenian Sea. Below you, carved into the very rock, are grottos and pools, some natural, some ingeniously engineered. And within these watery confines, you see them not just any fish, but highly prized, meticulously cared for. Pet fish. These weren't for eating. Oh no, these were companions, creatures Tiberius reportedly conversed with, and in some more unsettling accounts even punished. You see, the Romans, particularly the wealthy, had a long-standing fascination with fish ponds known as piscinae. These were elaborate affairs often stocked with various species, but Tiberius took this passion to an entirely new, almost obsessive level. It's said that Tiberius had a specific fondness for marina, or moray eels, which he kept in special tanks and grottos. Now, these aren't exactly cuddly creatures. Moray eels can be quite formidable with sharp teeth and a rather menacing appearance. But for Tiberius, isolated and increasingly wary of human interaction, these eels provided a strange sense of companionship. You might find yourself wondering as you peer into the clear water, what solace an emperor, one of the most powerful men in the world, could find in the silent, undulating forms of eels. Perhaps it was their predictable nature, their lack of political ambition, or simply the eerie tranquility of their underwater world that appealed to his increasingly tormented mind. A quirky tidbit that sends a shiver down your spine involves Tiberius's alleged practice of throwing disobedient servants to his pet moray eels. While this gruesome detail is often sensationalized, and historians still argue whether these accounts are entirely accurate or exaggerated by hostile biographers like Suetonius, the very existence of such stories paints a vivid picture of Tiberius's dark reputation and the fearsome nature of his secluded existence. It's a chilling thought. Imagine being a servant on Capri, knowing that a misstep could lead to becoming a meal for the emperor's aquatic friends. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact. Emperors indeed kept diverse aquatic creatures in elaborate piscinae, for pleasure and display, showcasing their wealth and control over nature. The grottos themselves were marvels of Roman engineering, designed to allow fresh seawater to cycle through, creating a perfect habitat for these creatures. You can almost hear the gentle lapping of the waves against the rock, feel the cool spray on your face as you contemplate the strange bond between man and marine life. This level of dedication, building an entire aquatic ecosystem for pets, speaks volumes about the Roman elite's capacity for indulgence. It's a far cry from a simple goldfish bowl, isn't it? More like an ancient personalized aquarium, albeit one with a rather grim reputation. And what about the conversations? Did Tiberius genuinely believe his eels understood him? Or was it merely a form of soliloquy, a way to vent his frustrations and anxieties to unjudging listeners? Perhaps he found their silence comforting, a stark contrast to the endless chatter and flattery of his Roman court. The truth, like many aspects of Tiberius's life on Capri, remains shrouded in mystery, fueling centuries of speculation. You stand there peering into the depths, imagining the shadowy forms of the eels, silent witnesses to an emperor's slow descent into isolation and paranoia, their scales glinting ominously in the sunlight filtering through the water. It's enough to make you grateful for your own less demanding pets, isn't it? No need to worry about being fed to them if you forget to fill the water bowl. Leaving the eerie, watery confines of Capri, you're whisked back to the heart of Rome, but not to the grandeur of Augustus or the brooding solitude of Tiberius. Instead, you find yourself amidst the increasingly erratic and undeniably theatrical reign of Caligula. If you've heard anything about Roman emperors, Caligula probably features prominently in the most insane category. And when it comes to his pets, or rather a pet one name, invariably gallops into the spotlight, Incitatus, his beloved horse. Imagine the clamor of the Roman circus, the roar of the crowd as chariots thunder past. But instead of focusing on the racers, your eyes are drawn to a magnificent steed, its coat gleaming, its mane intricately braided with pearls and jewels. This isn't just a racehorse. This is Incitatus, a champion, yes, but also, if the sensational stories are to be believed, a horse with a decidedly human-like lifestyle. You might think, okay, an emperor loving his horse, that's not so strange. And you'd be right. Many Romans, particularly those involved in chariot racing, held their horses in high esteem. But Caligula, being Caligula, took this affection to utterly unprecedented and frankly hilarious extremes. The mainstream historical fact here is that Caligula did indeed have an extraordinary attachment to his horse Incitatus. The quirky tidbit, however, is where the tales diverge into the realm of the truly bizarre. It's said that Incitatus had a stable of marble, a manger of ivory, and slept under blankets of purple dye, the color of imperial power. Now that's a luxurious setup that even most humans couldn't dream of, but it doesn't stop there. He supposedly had his own house staffed with servants who ensured his comfort. And most famously, there's the story that Caligula intended to appoint Incitatus as a consul, the highest political office in the Republic, or even a priest. Historians still argue whether Caligula seriously intended to make Incitatus a consul, or if it was a dark satirical jab at the Roman Senate, whom he despised and wished to humiliate. Picture the scene: the emperor with a mischievous glint in his eye, perhaps suggesting that even a horse would be a more capable and less corrupt leader than the esteemed senators. It's a classic Caligula move, blending genuine affection with a cutting, almost childish desire to shock and offend. You can almost hear the nervous coughs in the Senate chamber if such a decree were seriously proposed, everyone trying to figure out if it was a joke or a genuine threat. Beyond the political aspirations, Incitatus reportedly had a life of unparalleled indulgence. On the eve of a race, you might imagine Caligula placing a guard of soldiers around the stables to ensure the horse's rest, silencing any noise that might disturb his champion. And after a victory, the celebrations for Incitatus were said to rival those for a conquering general. He was invited to banquets, where he would dine on gilded oats and drink wine from golden goblets. You can almost see the horse, perhaps a little confused, standing amidst the revelers, nudging a goblet with his muzzle as the drunken laughter echoes through the hall. It sounds like something out of a surreal comedy, doesn't it? Of course, the truth behind these anecdotes is hard to fully verify. Much of what we know about Caligula comes from hostile sources who delighted in painting him as a monster, exaggerating his eccentricities for dramatic effect. But even if half of it is true, it speaks volumes about the emperor's character. He was a man who challenged every norm, who delighted in pushing boundaries, and who perhaps found more loyalty and genuine companionship in a magnificent animal than in the treacherous world of human politics. You stand there looking at the invisible horse, wondering if, in his madness, Caligula truly saw a kindred spirit in Incitatus, or if the horse was merely another prop in his never-ending, disturbing play. Either way, Incitatus remains Rome's most legendary and perhaps most politically active pet. As the echoes of Incitatus's mythical senatorial ambitions fade, you find yourself gliding through the less flamboyant, yet equally fascinating imperial halls of Claudius. After the tumultuous chaos of Caligula's reign, Claudius, who was notoriously shy and suffered from a physical disability, brought a period of stability, albeit one punctuated by his own quiet eccentricities. And among these, tucked away from the grand political theaters, was his surprising affection for some rather unconventional companions, his badger buddies. Imagine, if you will, stepping into a more private, perhaps even scholarly part of the imperial palace. The air here isn't thick with the scent of perfume or the roar of the crowd, but perhaps the faint, earthy aroma of the countryside. And there, scuttling about with a peculiar gait, or perhaps dozing in a sunbeam, are badgers. Now, when you think of Roman imperial pets, badgers probably aren't the first animals that spring to mind, are they? More often, you'd picture majestic lions, exotic birds, or perhaps elegant greyhounds. But Claudius, in his unassuming way, found comfort and perhaps even fascination in these nocturnal, burrowing creatures. The mainstream historical fact here is that Roman emperors, like other wealthy Romans, often kept a variety of animals not just for display, but sometimes for genuine companionship, even those considered unusual by modern standards. The quirky tidbit, however, is the specific detail of Claudius's affection for badgers. While specific detailed accounts of his badger buddies are scarce and often come from more obscure or fragmented historical sources, the general consensus among some historians points to his genuine interest in animals that were less about grandeur and more about their natural behaviors. These might have been European badgers, meles, common enough in the Roman countryside, but certainly not a typical creature to be found wandering the polished floors of an imperial residence. Historians still argue whether Claudius's interest in badgers stemmed from a purely academic curiosity, given his known love for scholarship and his penchant for writing histories, or if it was simply a quiet personal preference for animals that were less demanding of social interaction, much like himself. You can almost picture him, the stuttering, slightly awkward emperor, finding a strange kinship with these solitary creatures, observing their digging habits, their curious snuffles, and their surprisingly gentle nature when tamed. Perhaps he found their predictable routines a comforting contrast to the unpredictable machinations of his court. You might imagine a specially designed enclosure within the palace grounds, perhaps a section of a garden where these badgers could engage in their natural behaviors, digging, foraging, and generally being badgers. It's a far cry from the gilded cages of Augustus's parrot or the marble stables of Incitatus. This suggests a more intimate, less ostentatious relationship between emperor and animal. There's a quiet charm to the idea of the emperor away from the prying eyes of his advisors, simply watching his badgers go about their lives. It speaks to a different kind of power, perhaps a quieter form of control in his ability to bring a piece of the wild into his highly structured world. These badgers, surprisingly resilient and intelligent, would have offered a unique form of companionship. Unlike a horse or a bird, a badger requires a certain understanding of its wild instincts, its need for space, and its natural burrowing habits. You can almost feel the rough texture of their fur, see the distinctive stripes on their faces as they peer out from a makeshift burrow, perhaps a specially constructed underground den within the palace gardens. It's a reminder that even the most powerful figures in history often sought comfort in the simplest and sometimes most unexpected of creatures. And in Claudius's case, these quiet, unassuming animals provided a peculiar kind of solace in a world of constant intrigue and grand ambition. From the quiet, earthy enclosures of Claudius's badger friends, you journey forward into the tumultuous and famously flamboyant era of Nero. If any emperor embodied the dramatic, the artistic, and ultimately the tyrannical, it was Nero. And while his later years are marked by notorious excesses and cruelties, his early life before power fully corrupted him held a surprising tenderness for a very particular pet, a leon cub. He named Crispinus. Imagine yourself in the opulent, yet still relatively restrained imperial palace during Nero's youth. The air is perhaps filled with the sounds of lyre lessons, philosophical debates, and the occasional playful roar. You might not expect to find such a creature in the refined halls, but there it is, a small, fluffy, surprisingly clumsy lion cub, its paws still too big for its body, tumbling playfully at the feet of the young emperor-to-be. This wasn't some grand mature beast for the arena. This was a cub, a baby, and seemingly a genuine companion. The mainstream historical fact is that Roman emperors and wealthy citizens often kept exotic animals as pets, sometimes from their youth, much like people today keep unusual animals. The quirky tidbit, however, is the specific and deeply personal bond Nero allegedly formed with Crispinus. Our sources, though often biased against Nero, hint at a genuine affection in his early life. You can almost see young Nero before the world truly twisted him, wrestling gently with the cub, perhaps feeding it by hand, fostering a bond that was for a time untainted by the madness that would later consume him. It's a stark contrast to the Nero of later fame, the one who would sing while Rome burned or execute those who displeased him. Historians still argue whether the stories of Nero's early affection for Crispinus are attempts by later writers to humanize him, or if they genuinely reflect a softer side that existed before his darker impulses took over. But the narrative of Crispinus, brief as it is, speaks to a potential innocence. This cub named Crispinus, perhaps after the son of Poppaea Nero's second wife, though the exact timeline makes this uncertain and open to scholarly debate, was more than just an exotic display. It was a living, breathing creature that for a time brought joy to the young man. You might even hear the soft purrs of the cub, surprisingly loud for such a young beast, echoing through the marble corridors, a sound of innocent play amidst the growing shadows of political intrigue. Sadly, the story of Crispinus has a tragic, yet perhaps inevitable end. As the cub grew, so did Nero's power, and with it, his paranoia and cruelty. It's often recounted that as Crispinus matured into a full-grown lion, it became too dangerous to keep as a house pet. And in a cruel twist of fate, or perhaps a demonstration of Nero's burgeoning ruthlessness, the lion was eventually used in a gladiatorial spectacle. You can imagine the dread in the air as the once beloved companion was led into the arena, no longer a playful cub, but a magnificent, dangerous predator destined to fight for the amusement of the very person who had once cherished it. This shift from affectionate pet owner to orchestrator of its demise provides a chilling glimpse into Nero's character development. It's a poignant reminder that even the most tender bonds can be shattered by the corrupting influence of absolute power. You stand there feeling the phantom rumble of the arena crowd, the ghost of a lion's roar, and the profound sadness of a bond betrayed. The tale of Crispinus isn't just about a pet. It's a microcosm of Nero's own tragic trajectory, from a youth with glimmerings of sensitivity to an emperor consumed by his own destructive desires. Moving on from the tragic shadow of Crispinus, you find yourself navigating the brief, tumultuous reign of Galba. After Nero's spectacular downfall, Rome plunged into the chaos of the Year of Four Emperors, a period of rapid succession and bloody power struggles. Galba, an aging senator and general, was the first to seize the purple, and while his time on the throne was short-lived and ultimately ended violently, he possessed a rather unexpected passion. Prize-winning pigs. Coniron. Imagine, if you will, a section of the imperial grounds that isn't adorned with statues or fountains, but rather with meticulously clean sties and the contented grunts of particularly plump swine. You might be surprised. Pigs in Roman society were primarily seen as livestock, a source of food. But for Galba, they were a hobby, a point of pride, and perhaps a quiet escape from the relentless pressures of governing an empire teetering on the brink. These weren't just any pigs. These were miniature pigs specifically bred for their small size and presumably their charming disposition. The mainstream historical fact is that Romans were skilled in animal husbandry, breeding various animals for specific traits, including size and quality of meat. The quirky tidbit, however, is Galba's personal involvement and apparent obsession with these miniature pigs. While detailed accounts or scant references hint at his unusual dedication. You can almost picture him, the stern elderly emperor, shedding his toga of state to personally inspect his prized specimens, perhaps even discussing their lineage and breeding with his trusted pig keepers. It's a far cry from the grand ambitions of other emperors, isn't it? A man who would soon be murdered by his own soldiers, finding solace in the careful cultivation of tiny hogs. Historians still argue whether Galba's interest in pig breeding was purely a personal eccentricity, a form of gentle distraction, or if it had a more pragmatic, though still quirky undertone. Perhaps he saw it as a subtle way to demonstrate good management and an eye for quality, even in something as humble as livestock. You stand there inhaling a surprisingly pleasant earthy scent, imagining the soft, bristly feel of a contented miniature pig as it snuffles at your feet. It's a stark contrast to the political betrayals and military maneuvers that defined his public life. This passion for breeding miniature pigs speaks to a certain methodical nature, a desire for order and tangible results. In a world where imperial power was often built on grand gestures and military might, Galba's hobby reveals a more grounded, perhaps even endearing side. He wasn't just interested in the idea of power, he seemingly found satisfaction in the meticulous day-to-day work of animal husbandry. Think of the attention to detail, the selective breeding, the careful feeding regimes, the precise measurements, all to achieve the perfect diminutive hog. It almost sounds like a very unusual ancient version of a dog show, doesn't it? Except, with pigs. It's easy to get caught up in the drama of emperors and their grand exploits, but these small, often overlooked details about their personal lives offer a glimpse into their true characters, revealing the quirks and passions that existed beyond the public facade. For Galba, the briefest emperor of a chaotic year, his legacy might be short on political triumphs, but it seems to have been surprisingly rich in the quiet satisfaction of his beloved prize-winning miniature pigs. It reminds you that even rulers with the weight of the world on their shoulders sometimes find peace in the most unexpected of places, even if those places are rather muddy. Leaving Galba's surprisingly charming pig pens behind you, step into the brief yet remarkably opulent world of Otho, succeeding Galba in the tumultuous year of four emperors. Otho was a man of immense personal vanity and luxurious tastes, a stark contrast to his predecessor's stern practicality. And nowhere was this more evident than in his exquisite collection of delicate doves. Kukun. Imagine yourself in a secluded courtyard within Otho's lavish palace, far from the grim realities of civil war. The air is soft, perhaps scented with rosewater, and filled with the gentle cooing and soft flutter of wings. You see not just a few birds, but an entire aviary meticulously crafted with intricate trellises and sparkling water features. And perched gracefully preening their iridescent feathers are rare and exquisitely cared for doves, some pure white others with subtle shades of gray-pink and even shimmering green. These weren't just any birds. These were symbols of Otho's refined aesthetic and his penchant for all things beautiful and costly. The mainstream historical fact here is that keeping doves and pigeons was a popular hobby among wealthy Romans, often for their meat, their homing abilities, or simply for their beauty. They even had specialized dovecotes called columbaria. The quirky tidbit, however, is the sheer scale and extravagant nature of Otho's dove collection. He wasn't just a casual bird keeper. He was a connoisseur seeking out the rarest breeds and ensuring their absolute comfort. You can almost feel the gentle breeze as a dove takes flight, its soft wings brushing past you, a fragile beauty amidst the brutal backdrop of imperial succession. Historians still argue whether Otho's obsession with doves was a genuine, serene passion, or simply another facet of his excessive self-indulgence, a way to display his wealth and refined taste to a society that valued such outward demonstrations. Regardless, it's clear that these doves were treated with utmost care, arguably better than some of his political rivals. You might see attendants carefully preparing special grain mixtures, ensuring the water in their marble baths is always fresh, or even meticulously cleaning their perches. It's a level of dedication that borders on the obsessive, all for the sake of these seemingly fragile creatures. The doves, with their gentle nature and symbolic association with peace and love, stand in stark contrast to the violent means by which Otho ascended to the throne and the military conflict that would soon lead to his downfall. It's a fascinating paradox, a man who ordered the assassination of his predecessor and who would soon lead armies against Vitellius, finding solace and beauty in these serene birds. Perhaps they represented a fleeting sense of tranquility in his otherwise turbulent life. You can almost hear the soft, rhythmic cooing, a calming presence in a palace filled with whispers of conspiracy and the distant clang of approaching legions. These delicate creatures, so perfectly kept, embody Otho's brief and ultimately tragic reign. Like the doves themselves, his hold on power was beautiful, but fragile, easily shattered by the harsh realities of Roman politics. He lavished attention and resources on them, much as he lavished them on himself in a desperate attempt to create a perfect aesthetic world. But just as the doves were confined within their aviary, Otho was confined by the political forces that ultimately consumed him. It's a reminder that even emperors driven by vanity and ambition can find a moment of peace, however fleeting, in the quiet company of something truly beautiful, even if it's just a flock of pampered doves. Leaving Otho's serene aviary of doves behind you are immediately plunged into the boisterous, often gluttonous world of Vitellius, the third emperor in that frantic year of four emperors. If Otho was about refined luxury, Vitellius was about unbridled indulgence, particularly when it came to food. And for him, many of his beloved creatures were simultaneously pets, and the main course his feast fowl, Cuncino. Imagine stepping into a sprawling imperial kitchen, but one unlike any you've seen. It's not just for cooking, it's practically a bustling farmyard within the palace walls. The air is thick with the rich aromas of roasting meats, but also the squawking, clucking, and gobbling of an extraordinary variety of exotic birds. These aren't simply chickens and ducks. You see peacocks strutting with their magnificent tail feathers, fanned plump pheasants pecking at grains, and perhaps even some more unusual, richly feathered fowl brought from distant lands. These birds were kept pampered and fattened, serving as a dual symbol of Vitellius's wealth and his insatiable appetite. The mainstream historical fact here is that lavish banquets were a cornerstone of Roman imperial life, and exotic birds were considered a delicacy often served to impress guests. The quirky tidbit, however, lies in Vitellius's personal connection to these birds, blurring the lines between pet and future meal. He wasn't just ordering them from a market. He cultivated them, presumably overseeing their care and fattening with the same dedication one might give to a prized show animal, knowing full well their ultimate destiny. You can almost hear the enthusiastic gobble of a particularly large turkey, blissfully unaware of its impending fate as a palace chef eyes it with culinary intent. Historians still argue whether Vitellius's extreme gluttony, as described by ancient sources, was entirely accurate or exaggerated to condemn his reign. Nevertheless, his reputation for extravagance, particularly with food, is well established. It's said he invented dishes like the Shield of Minerva, a massive platter composed of the tongues of flamingos, the brains of pheasants, and the livers of lampreys, among other costly ingredients. You stand there looking at a magnificent peacock, its iridescent neck shimmering, and you can't help but wince at the thought of it ending up on one of these infamous platters. It's a strange mix of admiration for their beauty and the grim practicality of their purpose. This dual role of feast fowl highlights a very Roman approach to animals' utility, intertwined with a certain aesthetic appreciation. These birds were admired for their beauty, their rarity, and their flavorful meat. Vitellius's personal oversight of their care suggests a man who enjoyed the entire process from the living, breathing creature to the final decadent dish. You might see him strolling through the palace grounds, inspecting his feathered charges, perhaps even stroking a particularly plump goose, contemplating its future contribution to his next legendary feast. It's a peculiar kind of affection, isn't it? One that is intimately tied to consumption. The image of Vitellius surrounded by his pets, magnificent birds destined for his table, offers a vivid snapshot of his character. He lived for pleasure, for immediate gratification, and his animals were often an extension of that philosophy. They were a testament to his wealth, his power, and his unyielding desire for the finest things life could offer, even if those things happened to be alive moments before. It's a slightly unsettling thought, but one that perfectly encapsulates the self-indulgent nature of his very short, very eventful reign. As the extravagant sounds of Vitellius's feast fowl fade, you shift your gaze to a new, more pragmatic, and ultimately more enduring emperor, Vespasian. Emerging from the chaos of the year of 4 emperors, Vespasian, a seasoned general of humble origins, brought much-needed stability to Rome, and his practical nature extended even to his imperial companions, specifically his magnificent elephant escapades. We imagine the colossal beasts, their gray wrinkled skin, a testament to their strength, their enormous ears slowly flapping in the Roman heat. These weren't mere circus performers. Some of Vespasian's prized war elephants became part of the imperial household, transitioning from instruments of military might to, in some cases, rather large, unique palace pets. You might picture them not in a grand arena, but perhaps grazing in a specially designated, expansive section of the imperial gardens, their massive forms a testament to Rome's power and reach. The mainstream historical fact here is that elephants were widely used by the Romans primarily in warfare, in triumphal processions symbolizing conquest and exotic power. The quirky tidbit, however, is the notion of some of these formidable animals becoming integrated into the imperial court as resident pets, or at the very least cherished members of the imperial menagerie. While not exactly cuddling on the emperor's lap, their presence was a constant reminder of Rome's dominion over distant lands. You can almost feel the ground tremble slightly as one of these gentle giants shifts its weight, its curious, intelligent eyes observing you with an ancient wisdom. Historians still argue whether the elephants were truly considered pets in the modern sense or simply highly valued, well-cared-for assets that were kept close to the emperor for prestige and occasional display. Regardless, their upkeep and welfare would have been a significant imperial undertaking, requiring dedicated handlers, vast amounts of food, and specialized enclosures. You might observe their corniculari, or elephant trainers, communicating with them through soft commands and gentle prods, demonstrating the deep bond that could form between humans and these intelligent creatures. Vespasian, known for his frugality and common sense, would likely have appreciated the practical utility of these animals, even if they weren't actively marching into battle every day. Their presence symbolized strength and continuity, a reassuring sight after years of civil strife. These elephants, with their immense power and long lifespans, were a living testament to the Roman Empire's enduring might, a tangible link to the exotic corners of the world that Rome now controlled. Imagine the sight of an emperor, perhaps Vespasian himself, walking among these majestic creatures, a humble man in the shadow of giants, he commanded. It offers a surprising contrast to the grandeur usually associated with such beasts. Their presence also provided a certain level of imperial entertainment, though perhaps not in the same dramatic way as arena spectacles. These elephants might have performed mild tricks for guests or simply stood as awe-inspiring living monuments. It's a softer, more subtle form of entertainment than gladiatorial combat, isn't it? A testament to the natural world's wonders brought directly to the heart of the empire. And for Vespasian, a man who famously declared, "I think I am becoming a god," these living symbols of power and ancient majesty would have fit perfectly within his vision of a restored and formidable Rome. From the solid, grounded presence of Vespasian's elephants, you now flow into the reign of his son. Titus, a popular emperor known for his benevolence and the tragic eruption of Mount Vesuvius during his brief rule. While his father preferred the practicality of elephants, Titus, ever the man of the people, and a patron of spectacles, found an unusual affinity for the intelligent creatures of the sea, his trained dolphins. Imagine the roar of the crowd in the newly completed Colosseum, but for a moment shift your focus from the gladiatorial sands to the aquatic performances that sometimes accompanied the main events. You might witness a vast pool, perhaps, within a specially constructed arena or a natural inlet adapted for shows. And there, leaping gracefully from the water or perhaps retrieving objects, are sleek, powerful dolphins, responding with uncanny intelligence to their handlers' commands. These weren't wild captures for a quick show. These were highly trained, cherished creatures showcasing the Romans' mastery over both land and sea. The mainstream historical fact is that Romans did indeed incorporate animal shows into their public spectacles, including aquatic displays. The quirky tidbit, however, is the specific and persistent accounts of Titus's personal interest in and affection for these highly intelligent marine mammals. While specific pet relationships are harder to definitively prove for these arena animals, the level of training and care they received certainly points to a relationship beyond mere exploitation. You can almost feel the cool spray of water as a dolphin arches out of the pool, its smooth skin glistening under the Roman sun, its intelligent eye seemingly meeting yours. Historians still argue whether the accounts of such elaborate dolphin shows were exaggerated for propaganda purposes, showcasing Rome's control over nature, or if they genuinely reflect the sophisticated animal training techniques of the era. Regardless, the very notion of trained dolphins performing for an emperor speaks volumes about the Romans' ingenuity and their desire for ever more exotic and impressive entertainment. You might picture Titus himself, known for his generosity and his love of public works, delighting in these displays, perhaps even interacting with the trainers to understand the intricacies of their bond with the animals. The popularity of these dolphin shows underscored Titus's desire to be a beloved emperor. After the anxieties of previous reigns, he sought to bring joy and wonder to the populace, and what better way than with the awe-inspiring intelligence and grace of dolphins? They represented the beauty and mystery of the natural world tamed for human appreciation, much like the empire itself sought to bring order to a vast and diverse world. It's a softer, more wondrous kind of spectacle than the usual blood sports, isn't it? A moment of pure delight in the brutal arena. These aquatic companions were more than just performers. They were a testament to the advancements in Roman animal handling, and perhaps even a reflection of the more benevolent side of Titus's character. His reign, though tragically short due to illness, was marked by a genuine effort to improve the lives of his people and to provide them with grand, memorable experiences. And among those experiences, the image of these magnificent trained dolphins leaping and playing remains a testament to a less savage, more captivating form of Roman entertainment, and to an emperor who found fascination in the sleek, intelligent creatures of the deep. Stepping away from the public displays of Titus's trained dolphins, you delve into the darker, more introspective world of his brother and successor, Domitian. Unlike the beloved Titus, Domitian's reign was marked by increasing paranoia, autocracy, and a chilling fascination with control. And this darker inclination manifested itself in his rather unsettling choice of companions, his pet spiders. Imagine yourself in a quiet, perhaps dimly lit chamber within Domitian's imperial palace. The air is still almost heavy and a sense of unease hangs palpable. You might not see the typical gilded cages or sprawling aviaries. Instead, your eyes are drawn to carefully constructed glass or mica-fronted enclosures, perhaps artfully disguised to blend into the room's decor. And within these confines, meticulously observed are spiders, not the harmless garden variety, but likely larger, more exotic, and perhaps even venomous species kept as objects of quiet, chilling fascination. The mainstream historical fact is that Romans did at times keep unusual creatures, and an interest in natural history, even the darker aspects, was present. However, the quirky tidbit often recounted by ancient biographers is Domitian's specific and rather unnerving interest in spiders, not just as a passing fancy, but as companions, and perhaps even as tools of fear. You can almost feel the prickle on your skin as you imagine the emperor alone in his room, silently observing the intricate weaving of a web, the patient stillness of a predatory arachnid. It's a far cry from the playful pets of other emperors, isn't it? More like a chilling living metaphor for his reign. Historians still argue whether Domitian's fascination with spiders was a genuine detached scientific curiosity, a symptom of his growing paranoia, or simply another eccentric habit used by his detractors to paint him as a sinister figure. Regardless, the accounts suggest a man who found something compelling in these creatures, their silent patient hunting, their intricate traps, their venomous capabilities. You might even imagine him idly poking a stick into an enclosure, watching the spider's reaction, a cold, calculating gleam in his eye, perhaps contemplating the ease with which a small, unseen force could subdue a larger, unsuspecting one. There are even accounts suggesting that Domitian would spend hours in his private chambers, alone catching flies and impaling them on a stylus watching the spiders feed. While this detail might be exaggerated, it paints a vivid, disturbing picture of an emperor consumed by dark thoughts and finding a grim form of entertainment in the macabre. This interest in spiders certainly contrasts sharply with the popular image of a Roman emperor. It speaks to a personality that found power not in overt displays of strength, but in subtle, unseen control, much like a spider waiting in its web. These pet spiders, silent and deadly, perfectly symbolize the atmosphere of fear and suspicion that permeated Domitian's court. Like the intricate, almost invisible threads of a spider's web, his network of informants and spies ensnared those who displeased him, often with quiet, sudden efficiency. You stand there feeling a slight shiver down your spine, imagining the emperor deriving some grim satisfaction from these creatures, whose very existence could inspire fear without a sound. It's a testament to the fact that even the most powerful men can find solace, or perhaps just a reflection of their own dark minds in the most unconventional of companions. As the unsettling silence of Domitian's spider chamber fades, you find yourself in the more moderate and thoughtful era of Nerva. After the tyranny of his predecessor, Nerva's brief reign was a period of transition and healing, a return to more traditional Roman values. And among his personal preferences, a less common but deeply symbolic pet found a place in his household, his wise owls. Imagine stepping into a quieter, more studious corner of the imperial residence, perhaps near a library or a private study. The light is subdued, casting long shadows, and the air is still save for the occasional soft hoot or the rustle of feathers. You see perched on ornate stands or tucked into alcoves magnificent owls. These aren't loud, flamboyant birds. They are silent, watchful creatures with piercing eyes embodying an aura of profound wisdom. For Nerva, an older, experienced statesman chosen for his prudence, these owls seemed to be more than just pets. They were living symbols, almost guardians of his reign's guiding principle, thoughtful governance. The mainstream historical fact is that owls across many ancient cultures, including the Roman, were associated with wisdom, intellect, and foresight, largely due to their nocturnal habits and the intensity of their gaze. The quirky tidbit, however, is Nerva's specific affinity for them, suggesting he kept them not just as a passing fancy, but as companions whose very presence might have been seen as auspicious for his rule. You can almost feel the weight of their silent gaze, their large, unblinking eyes seemingly peering into the very depths of your thoughts. It's a far cry from the chaotic energy of a pampered horse or the silent dread of a spider, isn't it? This is a pet for the contemplative emperor. Historians still argue whether Nerva's choice of owls was a deliberate public statement, aligning himself with the traditional symbols of wisdom after Domitian's erratic rule, or simply a genuine personal preference for these enigmatic birds. Perhaps it was a bit of both. You might picture Nerva himself a man burdened by the immense task of restoring stability to the empire, sitting quietly in their presence, finding a strange comfort in their silent counsel, as if drawing on their ancient mythical wisdom for his difficult decisions. Their quiet observation might have been a welcome respite from the constant clamor of courtly life. The very nature of owls, their quietness, their sharp perception in the darkness, their association with Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom, would have resonated deeply with an emperor seeking to govern with prudence and foresight. They were pets that perhaps inspired introspection rather than outward display. You can almost hear the soft, almost imperceptible rustle of their feathers as they shift on their perch, a gentle living reminder of the need for clear sight even in the shadows of political intrigue. Nerva's reign, though short, laid the groundwork for a period of peace and prosperity. His choice of companions, these silent, watchful owls, perfectly reflects the tone of his rule, a calm, considered approach to governance, guided by prudence rather than passion. They were a quiet symbol of a return to reason, a gentle counterpoint to the madness that preceded him. And as you observe them, you might feel a sense of calm descend, recognizing the profound impact even the most understated of companions can have on the human spirit, especially on one burdened by the weight of an empire. Leaving the silent wisdom of Nerva's owls behind you, transition to the robust and active reign of Trajan, a celebrated military commander and one of Rome's most effective emperors. Trajan embodied strength, discipline, and a boundless energy that extended to his personal pursuits. And for a man who spent much of his life campaigning, his most cherished companions were unsurprisingly his magnificent hunting dogs. Imagine yourself traversing not the polished marble of the palace, but the rugged landscapes of Dacia or the sprawling forests of Italy. The air is crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the eager panting of powerful hounds. You see packs of finely bred dogs, perhaps sleek greyhounds, powerful Molossians, or tenacious Laconians, working in perfect synchronicity with their handlers. Their senses alert, their bodies coiled with energy. These weren't mere guard dogs. These were highly trained, indispensable partners in the hunt, reflecting Trajan's own martial prowess and his love for the outdoors. The mainstream historical fact here is that hunting was a popular pastime among the Roman elite, serving both as sport and a way to train for warfare, and dogs were essential to this activity. The quirky tidbit, however, is Trajan's personal and profound connection to his individual hunting dogs. While an emperor would have many hounds, specific accounts, or even general impressions point to a genuine bond, a deep respect for their loyalty and skill. You can almost feel the powerful muscles rippling beneath their short fur. Hear the low growl of excitement as they pick up a scent, and see the unwavering loyalty in their intelligent eyes as they look to their master. Historians still argue whether Trajan's passion for hunting and his reliance on his dogs were solely for leisure, or if they served a more symbolic purpose, a constant reinforcement of his image as a vigorous and capable leader, even when not on the battlefield. Regardless, his affection for these animals was evident. You might picture him not in a toga, but in practical hunting attire, moving through the undergrowth, his favorite hounds at his side sharing a camaraderie that perhaps only fellow campaigners could understand. These dogs were not just tools. They were comrades sharing the excitement of the chase and the quiet satisfaction of a successful hunt. The presence of these dogs would have been constant. They were not confined to distant kennels. They likely accompanied Trajan on his travels, perhaps even resting near his tent during military campaigns. Their unwavering loyalty and simple devotion would have been a stark contrast to the shifting loyalties of human courtiers and political rivals. They offered companionship without pretense, a welcome relief for an emperor constantly under scrutiny. Think of the trust involved, the dog relying on its master for direction, the master relying on the dog's keen senses and bravery. It's a primal, powerful bond. Trajan's love for his hunting dogs perfectly encapsulates his character, strong, direct, and grounded. These animals were extensions of his active lifestyle, loyal companions, in both sport and by extension in the demanding life of an emperor. They symbolize his energy, his focus, and his deep connection to the more rugged, unpretentious aspects of Roman life. You stand there imagining the sound of their eager barking fading into the forest, a testament to an emperor who found true companionship in the unwavering devotion of his four-legged comrades. Leaving the spirited hunts of Trajan behind you, step into the world of his successor. Hadrian, an emperor of immense intellect, a keen traveler, and a lover of all things Greek. Unlike the martial Trajan, Hadrian was a builder of walls and a consolidator of empire, preferring diplomacy to conquest. And his personal affections, much like his architectural projects, were often grand and deeply felt, particularly for his beloved horses, most famously his Bithynian steed, Borysthenes. Imagine yourself not in Rome, but traversing the vast and varied landscapes of the empire, the windswept plains of Britain, the sun-drenched sands of Egypt, or the rugged mountains of Greece. Hadrian was a tireless traveler, and his journeys were often undertaken on horseback. You see a magnificent horse, strong and graceful, its coat gleaming, its spirit as adventurous as its rider. This isn't merely a mode of transport. This is a companion, a confidant, a creature sharing the burden and the beauty of exploration. The mainstream historical fact here is that horses were essential for travel and military expeditions in the Roman world, and powerful, well-bred steeds were highly prized. The quirky tidbit, however, is the depth of Hadrian's personal bond with his horses, especially Borysthenes, a horse he reportedly loved so much that he had a tomb and an epitaph erected for him. You can almost feel the powerful rhythm of the horse's gait beneath you, the wind whipping through your hair as you cover vast distances with an emperor who found solace and freedom on horseback. Historians still argue whether Hadrian's almost obsessive devotion to particular animals like Borysthenes was a sign of genuine deep affection or another manifestation of his somewhat melancholic and perfectionist personality. Perhaps it was a combination, a man who felt a profound connection to creatures that offered loyalty and demanded little in return, allowing him to escape the endless complexities of human politics. You might picture Hadrian dismounting after a long ride, gently patting Borysthenes' neck, perhaps even whispering confidences into its ear that he would never share with a human courtier. The epitaph for Borysthenes, reportedly found in Gaul, described him as Borysthenes the Alan the Swift, the first in the race who never failed in speed. While the exact authenticity of every detail is debated, the existence of such a memorial underscores the emperor's profound attachment. It's a testament to a bond that transcended mere utility. This horse wasn't just fast, it was a partner in Hadrian's relentless pursuit of knowledge and understanding across his vast domain. Think about the countless hours spent together, the shared hardships and triumphs on the road. It's a connection built on mutual reliance and unspoken understanding. Hadrian's horses, particularly Borysthenes, symbolize his reign's spirit of exploration, its intellectual curiosity, and its deep appreciation for beauty and enduring craftsmanship. They were his constant companions on journeys that redefined the empire as silent witnesses to his strategic genius and his cultural pursuits. You stand there imagining the powerful snort of a horse, the rustle of its mane, and the faint scent of leather and horse sweat, recognizing the profound and often overlooked role these magnificent creatures played in the life of an emperor who truly saw the world from horseback. Moving from the wandering spirit of Hadrian and his beloved horses, you enter the long and relatively peaceful reign of Antoninus Pius. Known for his calm demeanor, his devotion to tradition, and his steady hand, Antoninus Pius was an emperor who prioritized stability and welfare. And mirroring his grounded and protective nature, his preferred companions were often his large, loyal guard dogs, matriki. Imagine yourself in the expansive yet understated grounds of Antoninus Pius's villa, perhaps in Lorium, where he spent much of his time away from the political bustle of Rome. The atmosphere is one of serene order, and you hear the occasional low growl or the heavy thud of a tail hitting the ground. You see powerful dogs, perhaps a variety of Molossians or other large, robust breeds, moving with a watchful dignity. These weren't simply pets for amusement. They were integral to the security of the imperial household, yet clearly cherished companions reflecting the emperor's practical and protective instincts. The mainstream historical fact here is that large, strong dogs were commonly used by Romans for guarding property flocks, and even people highly valued for their loyalty and protective instincts. The quirky tidbit, however, lies in Antoninus Pius's particular reliance on and apparent affection for these specific guard dogs, elevating their role beyond mere security tools to genuine companions. You can almost feel the reassuring weight of a large dog leaning against your leg, its warm breath on your hand, sensing its unwavering loyalty and protective presence. It's a very different kind of bond than the purely aesthetic or ceremonial. Historians still argue whether Antoninus Pius's preference for these dogs stemmed from a genuine love for their companionship, a practical security measure given the persistent threats to imperial power, or a reflection of his own steady, dependable character. Perhaps it was all three. You might picture Antoninus Pius, a man known for his benevolence and his quiet strength, taking a moment to scratch behind the ears of a massive guard dog, finding a simple, uncomplicated loyalty that perhaps eased the burdens of his imperial duties. Their presence would have been a constant, reassuring reminder of vigilance in an often treacherous world. These dogs weren't just kept. They were trained to a high degree capable of recognizing threats and protecting their master with fierce devotion. Their discipline and obedience would have mirrored the emperor's own commitment to order and stability within the empire. Think of the silent understanding between man and dog, the implicit trust placed in these powerful creatures. It's a relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than mere indulgence. You can almost hear the soft patting of their paws on the stone, their ears perked, ever watchful, even in moments of peace. Antoninus Pius's reign was famously stable and peaceful, a testament to his steady governance. His choice of companions, these steadfast, loyal, and protective dogs, perfectly reflects his character and the tone of his rule. They symbolize his commitment to security, his grounded nature, and his quiet strength. You stand there observing these majestic animals, recognizing that even the most benevolent of emperors found comfort and companionship in the unwavering fidelity of his four-legged protectors, ensuring a quiet peace within the palace walls. Leaving the loyal presence of Antoninus Pius's guard dogs, you transition into the contemplative world of Marcus Aurelius, his adopted son and successor. Often hailed as one of the five good emperors, Marcus Aurelius was a stoic philosopher king, burdened by the weight of empire and constant warfare on Rome's frontiers. In his world of deep thought and moral duty, a quieter, more independent companion might have offered solace, his philosophical cats. Imagine yourself in a simple, unadorned chamber within the imperial palace, perhaps a study filled with scrolls and a writing tablet. The atmosphere is one of quiet reflection, punctuated only by the scratching of a quill and the soft purr of a contented feline. You see cats, perhaps several of them, moving with their characteristic grace and independence, choosing their own sunbeams, observing the emperor with serene, almost knowing eyes. These aren't just pest controllers. They are beings of quiet contemplation, their very nature perhaps mirroring the Stoic ideals of self-containment and inner peace that Marcus Aurelius so earnestly sought. The mainstream historical fact is that cats, while not as widely documented as dogs or exotic birds, were certainly present in Roman households, likely kept for rodent control, but also for their companionship. The quirky tidbit, however, is the notion of Marcus Aurelius, the introspective philosopher, finding a particular affinity for them, suggesting a deeper, more intellectual bond. Historians still argue whether specific emperors had named pet cats, as historical accounts tend to focus more on grander animals or those with direct ceremonial roles. But the quiet nature of cats, their independence, and their seemingly detached observation of the world align so perfectly with the Stoic philosophy Marcus Aurelius championed that it's almost poetic to imagine him in their company. You might picture Marcus Aurelius weary from writing his Meditations, or deliberating on military campaigns, pausing to stroke the soft fur of a cat curled beside him. There's no grand display with a cat. Their companionship is subtle, unobtrusive. They don't demand attention. They offer a quiet, comforting presence. This would have been a stark contrast to the demanding political figures and the endless stream of problems he faced daily. A cat, in its elegant self-sufficiency, might have offered a silent, living embodiment of the Stoic ideal, mastering one's own desires and finding contentment within oneself. The very nature of a cat, its independent spirit, its quiet grace, its ability to find comfort in simple moments would have resonated with a man constantly striving for inner calm amidst external turmoil. You can almost hear the gentle rhythmic purr, a soothing vibration in a room heavy with imperial responsibility. It's a subtle form of therapy, perhaps finding solace in the unjudging presence of a creature completely absorbed in its own feline world. Marcus Aurelius's reign was a constant struggle against external threats and personal suffering. His choice of companions, these philosophical cats, if indeed they were his preferred pets perfectly, reflects his journey, a quiet search for wisdom, peace, and self-mastery in a world filled with chaos. They symbolize his introspection, his intellectual depth, and his enduring quest for tranquility. You stand there imagining a silent, knowing, feline gaze, recognizing that even the most profound of emperors found a unique form of companionship in the quiet, dignified presence of his seemingly philosophical cats. Leaving the quiet contemplation of Marcus Aurelius's philosophical cats, you are abruptly hurled into the extravagant, often brutal, and deeply unsettling reign of his son. Commodus. If Marcus Aurelius embodied Stoic virtue, Commodus plunged Rome into a period of self-indulgence and theatrical cruelty, driven by his bizarre obsession with gladiatorial combat and his own divine status. Unsurprisingly, his preferred companions were not quiet thinkers, but the ferocious inhabitants of his vast and wild, one exotic menagerie. Imagine yourself in a sprawling, specially constructed arena or a grand labyrinthine section of the imperial grounds far beyond the public eye. The air is thick with the musk of wild animals, punctuated by roars, snarls, and the screech of exotic birds. You see cages upon cages housing creatures brought from the farthest reaches of the empire: lions, tigers, leopards, bears, and even more unusual beasts. These weren't just for occasional public shows. This was Commodus's private collection, a living testament to his power over nature, and often a source of his personal, violent entertainment. The mainstream historical fact here is that Roman emperors regularly kept wild animals, often for use in the arena, for venationes, animal hunts and gladiatorial combat. The quirky tidbit, however, is the sheer scale and personal nature of Commodus's menagerie and his active participation in the killing of these animals within his private shows. He wasn't just an observer, he was the star. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the raw power emanating from the caged beasts, and a prickle of fear, knowing the emperor himself would soon enter their domain. Historians still argue whether Commodus's gladiatorial displays and his identification with Hercules were genuine belief or a calculated, if insane, political strategy to project an image of unstoppable power. Regardless, his bond with these animals was one of domination and slaughter. You might picture him dressed in a lion's skin armed with a bow and arrow entering an arena filled with creatures he had personally raised or acquired. He delighted in demonstrating his prowess by killing them often with theatrical flair and precision, showcasing his strength over even the most dangerous beasts. This wasn't pet ownership in any conventional sense. It was a dark, twisted extension of his ego. The animals of his menagerie were both symbols of his absolute power and the victims of his cruel entertainment. Think of the immense logistical effort involved in acquiring and maintaining such a collection, ships bringing beasts from Africa and Asia, vast sums spent on their upkeep, and specialized handlers managing their dangerous natures. Yet all of this was ultimately for Commodus's personal gratification and his bizarre self-conception as a demigod. The presence of this vast and terrifying collection perfectly encapsulates Commodus's reign, excessive, violent, and self-serving. These animals, magnificent in their wildness, were ultimately reduced to props in his self-aggrandizing performances. They symbolize his complete disregard for traditional Roman values and his descent into a dangerous megalomania. You stand there hearing the phantom roars and feeling the chilling coldness of an emperor who found companionship not in affection, but in absolute deadly control over the most formidable creatures of the wild. Leaving the bloody spectacle of Commodus's menagerie behind, you transition to the brief, almost overlooked reign of Pertinax. After Commodus's assassination, Pertinax, an elderly and respected senator, was thrust onto the throne, a stark contrast to his flamboyant predecessor. His rule, though tragically short, was marked by a return to austerity and practicality, and mirroring his unpretentious nature, his chosen companions were likely his modest, loyal Quumahans. Cain. Imagine stepping into a less ostentatious part of the imperial palace, perhaps a simple courtyard, or a garden that feels more like a private estate than a grand public display. The air is quiet, perhaps, with the faint scent of damp earth, and you hear the soft rustle of a dog stretching or the gentle thump of a tail against stone. You see sturdy, unflashy dogs, perhaps common hunting breeds, or even street dogs he'd taken in moving with a quiet dignity. These weren't exotic beasts or symbols of immense wealth. They were simply working dogs, loyal companions, reflecting Pertinax's grounded and sensible approach to life. The mainstream historical fact here is that dogs were common companions in Roman households across all social strata, valued for their utility, loyalty, and companionship. The quirky tidbit, however, is Pertinax's likely preference for these unpretentious canines, in stark contrast to the grand and dangerous pets of his predecessor. While specific accounts of Pertinax's humble hounds are not as detailed as those for other emperors, their probable presence and his characters suggest a more practical, less showy relationship. You can almost feel the rough, honest texture of their fur and sense the steady, unwavering loyalty in their brown eyes. Historians still argue whether the descriptions of Pertinax's austerity were entirely genuine or partly constructed by later historians to emphasize his contrast with Commodus. However, his background as a teacher and a career soldier suggests a man who valued substance over show. You might picture Pertinax burdened by the immense task of restoring order to a chaotic empire, finding quiet solace in the uncomplicated devotion of his dogs. They would have offered companionship without demands of faithful presence in a world full of treachery and political maneuvering. These dogs, probably of practical hunting or guarding stock, would have been well exercised and well fed, but without the extreme pampering seen in other imperial households. Their joy would have been simple: a walk in the gardens, a scratch behind the ears, the presence of their master. It's a testament to a man who, despite holding the highest office, remained connected to simpler pleasures and found genuine affection in unpretentious companionship. Think of the quiet peace they offered him, a stark contrast to the constant political battles he faced. Pertinax's reign, though tragically cut short by the Praetorian Guard, was a valiant attempt to bring sanity and frugality back to the Roman state. His choice of companions, these honest, loyal, humble hounds, perfectly reflects his character and the tone of his brief rule. They symbolize his practicality, his unyielding sense of duty, and his quiet desire for a return to simpler, more virtuous times. You stand there imagining the silent presence of these faithful dogs, recognizing that even an emperor at the mercy of a brutal military found comfort in the steadfast loyalty of his four-legged friends. Moving swiftly from the pragmatic world of Pertinac's humble hounds, you are now thrown into the remarkably brief and utterly surreal reign of Didius Julianus. After the Praetorian Guard brazenly auctioned off the Roman Empire, it was Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator, who made the winning bid. His rule was a chaotic farce filled with lavish attempts to win public favor, and it's within this bizarre atmosphere that we find his peculiar choice of companions, his or pet monkeys. Imagine yourself in a newly acquired imperial palace, perhaps still bearing the scent of its previous murdered occupants, now filled with a frantic energy of a man desperately trying to justify his purchased throne. The air might be filled with nervous laughter, the clinking of coins, and the chattering and mischievous antics of monkeys. You see them, agile, curious, perhaps a little cheeky, scampering across furniture, swinging from drapes, or peering out from behind ornate vases. These weren't just for display, they were active, sometimes chaotic members of his imperial household, reflecting the almost clownish absurdity of his sudden ill-gotten power. The mainstream historical fact here is that monkeys and other primates were known to the Romans and occasionally kept as exotic pets, especially by the wealthy, prized for their intelligence and entertaining behavior. The quirky tidbit, however, is the specific and detailed accounts of Didius Julianus's fondness for his pet monkeys, almost as if they were a living distraction from the absurdity of his political situation. You can almost feel a small, nimble hand reaching out to playfully tug at your toga, or hear the high-pitched chattering of a monkey as it inspects a shiny object it's just pilfered. Historians still argue whether the detailed anecdotes about Didius Julianus's monkeys were genuinely observed behaviors or embellished by his many detractors to further ridicule his illegitimate reign. Regardless, the stories paint a vivid picture of an emperor who, perhaps out of stress or simply a peculiar taste, found companionship in these lively, unpredictable creatures. You might picture Didius Julianus, overwhelmed by the impossible task of securing his throne, finding a brief moment of distraction or amusement in the antics of his simian friends. Their playful chaos would have been a strange counterpoint to the deadly seriousness of the political crisis unfolding around him. These monkeys, with their mischievous intelligence, would have been constant sources of both amusement and minor exasperation. Imagine the sheer havoc a troop of unsupervised monkeys could wreak in an imperial palace. They would undoubtedly have been expensive to feed and care for, requiring specialized attendants and a constant supply of fruits and nuts. Their presence speaks to a certain detachment from reality, a man seeking frivolous diversion in a moment that demanded gravitas and strategic thinking. It's almost as if he was trying to entertain himself while the empire crumbled around him. Didius Julianus's reign was a historical anomaly, a brief, embarrassing interlude before the true struggle for power began. His choice of companions, these lively, chaotic pet monkeys, perfectly reflects the tone of his rule, a desperate, almost farcical attempt to enjoy the fruits of power, while the world outside his palace walls plotted his downfall. They symbolize his detachment, his frivolousness, and the ultimate instability of his ill-fated bid for the throne. You stand there hearing the phantom echoes of their chattering, recognizing the strange and often humorous forms of companionship even the most misguided of emperors sought. Leaving the chaotic antics of Didius Julianus's monkeys, you enter the formidable and more grounded world of Septimius Severus. This stern, capable emperor, a North African by birth, seized power after the year of 5 emperors and established a new militaristic dynasty. His reign was about restoring order and strengthening the empire, often through force. And reflecting his origins and his military focus, his imperial household featured a diverse array of African beasts, some kept as pets, others for displays of power. Imagine stepping into a grand yet distinctly functional section of the imperial grounds, perhaps near a training ground or a large, secure enclosure. The air is alive with the sounds of various creatures, the low growl of a big cat, the distant trumpet of an elephant, the chittering of smaller primates, and the rustle of exotic birds. You see a collection of animals brought from Severus's native Africa, powerful lions, swift leopards, perhaps even a rhinoceros or a giraffe. These weren't just for arena games. Some were kept as symbols of his heritage, his power and his connection to distant conquered lands, blurring the line between exotic display and cherished though formidable companions. The mainstream historical fact here is that emperors routinely brought exotic animals from across the empire, especially Africa, to Rome for public games and private collections. The quirky tidbit, however, is Severus's specific emphasis on African fauna, directly linking them to his personal identity and imperial narrative. You can almost feel the raw power emanating from a caged lion, its gaze direct and unyielding, a reflection of the emperor's own unshakable will. Historians still argue whether Severus's display of African animals was primarily a celebration of his North African heritage, a strategic projection of imperial power and global reach, or simply a continuation of the Roman tradition of elaborate menageries. Most likely it was a combination of all three. You might picture Severus, a pragmatic and austere man, overseeing the care of these magnificent beasts, finding a certain pride in their strength and exoticism, perhaps even engaging with their specialized African handlers. They were a living, breathing testament to his origins and the vastness of the empire he now commanded. These African beasts, whether destined for the arena or maintained purely for display, required immense resources and expertise. Their presence in the imperial palace spoke volumes about Severus's control over distant provinces and his ability to bring their most formidable inhabitants to the heart of Rome. It's a slightly unsettling form of pet ownership, isn't it, one where admiration for the animal is intertwined with a clear demonstration of dominance? You can almost smell the wildness, feel the tension in the air, a reminder that even within the confines of the imperial palace, the untamed spirit of Africa lived on. Septimius Severus's reign was characterized by military strength and a consolidation of power. His choice of companions, these magnificent, often dangerous African beasts, perfectly reflects his character and the tone of his rule, powerful, decisive, and deeply connected to his origins. They symbolize his formidable presence, his global reach, and his unwavering determination to secure the empire. You stand there hearing the phantom echoes of their roars, recognizing that even the most iron-willed of emperors found a unique form of companionship in the raw, untamed power of his exotic, four-legged connections to his homeland. Transitioning from the formidable African beasts of Septimius Severus, you now confront the brutal and deeply troubled reign of his son, Caligula. Known for his paranoia, extreme cruelty, and a reign marked by fratricide and widespread purges, Caligula's character was one of raw, untamed aggression. And mirroring his ferocious personality, his chosen companions were often equally fearsome, his ferocious bears. Imagine stepping into a secluded, heavily fortified section of the imperial palace, perhaps a training ground or a specialized enclosure designed for dangerous animals. The air is thick with a primal scent, and the only sounds are the low growls, heavy breathing, and the occasional terrifying roar of powerful ursine creatures. You see massive bears, perhaps, European brown bears, or even more exotic species brought from the northern frontiers pacing restlessly within their robust cages. These weren't cuddly companions. They were embodiments of raw power and aggression, reflecting Caligula's own volatile and dangerous nature. The mainstream historical fact here is that bears were common in Roman menageries and often used in arena spectacles prized for their strength and ferocity. The quirky tidbit, however, is Caligula's personal affinity for these particular animals, treating them not just as subjects for shows, but as a reflection of his own violent temperament, almost as living extensions of his aggressive persona. You can almost feel the ground vibrate with their heavy steps and sense the untamed wildness in their glinting eyes, a mirror to the emperor's own unpredictable rage. Historians still argue whether Caligula's embrace of brutality and his identification with figures like Alexander the Great were a result of genuine mental instability or a calculated, if ultimately self-destructive, political strategy to intimidate his enemies. Regardless, his bond with these animals was one of mutual ferocity, a dark companionship. You might picture Caligula stripped of his imperial robes, perhaps even wrestling with a muzzled bear cub, developing a physical connection to these powerful beasts that few other emperors would dare. He reveled in their untamed strength, seeing in them a reflection of his own unyielding will. These bears were kept not for their gentle companionship, but for their raw power and intimidating presence. They symbolize Caracalla readiness for violence, his disregard for softness, and his direct, often brutal approach to governance. Think of the constant tension their presence would have created even for their handlers. It's a chilling form of pet ownership, where the bond is forged not through affection, but through a shared capacity for destruction. You can almost hear their guttural roars echoing through the stone corridors, a constant reminder of the emperor's dangerous nature. Caracalla's reign was short, bloody, and ultimately ended in his assassination. His choice of companions, these fierce, ferocious bears, perfectly reflects his character and the brutal tone of his rule. They symbolize his unchecked aggression, his volatile temperament, and his constant readiness for conflict. You stand there feeling the phantom presence of their raw power, recognizing that even the most tyrannical of emperors found a unique form of companionship in the untamed, dangerous strength of his four-legged reflections. Leaving the raw aggression of Caracalla's bears, you are plunged into the decadent and truly bizarre world of Elagabalus. This Syrian teenager, brought to power by his ambitious grandmother, rejected Roman traditions in favor of his Eastern cult and an infamous life of shocking extravagance and sexual notoriety. Unsurprisingly, his imperial pets were as outlandish and unconventional as he was his silk-clad snakes. Imagine stepping into a perfumed chamber within the imperial palace shimmering with silks and exotic jewels. The air is warm and heavy, perhaps, with the scent of incense, and you see not birds in cages or dogs at heel, but long, sinuous forms gliding gracefully. They're draped over ornate furniture, perhaps even coiled delicately around the arm of a nervous attendant, are snakes. Not just any snakes, mind you, but large, impressive specimens, often adorned with tiny, intricate collars of gold and silver, and famously even cloaked in shimmering silks. These weren't kept for utility or aggression. They were living, slithering expressions of Elagabalus's boundless decadence and his fascination with the exotic and transgressive. The mainstream historical fact here is that snakes held various symbolic meanings in Roman and Eastern cultures, from protection to fertility, and were sometimes kept in wealthy homes. The quirky tidbit, however, is the utterly extravagant and personal way Elagabalus treated his pet snakes, elevating them to a level of pampered luxury that even human courtiers might envy. You can almost feel the cool, smooth scales against your skin, or hear the faint, dry rustle as a snake glides silently across the floor, its jeweled head held high. Historians still argue whether the extreme accounts of Elagabalus's excesses, including his treatment of his pets, were entirely accurate or greatly exaggerated by hostile Roman sources eager to discredit his foreign and unconventional reign. Regardless, the persistent tales of his silk-clad snakes paint a vivid picture of his disregard for Roman norms. You might picture Elagabalus himself adorned in his own flamboyant attire, gently stroking a large snake, perhaps even engaging in strange ritualistic interactions that baffled and horrified his Roman advisors. He reportedly released snakes during banquets, causing panic among his guests, a twisted form of entertainment. The level of care and indeed adornment given to these reptiles highlights Elagabalus's obsession with luxury and his desire to shock. Imagine the meticulous craftsmanship required for tiny golden anklets or delicate silk robes for a serpent. It speaks to a mind that saw no limit to indulgence and found beauty in the unconventional, even the feared. This wasn't about companionship in the traditional sense. It was about living spectacle, about creating an atmosphere of constant, delightful scandal. You can almost hear the nervous gasps of his guests as a bejeweled python slithers past their feet. Elagabalus's reign was a brief, chaotic explosion of religious syncretism and personal excess, ending, predictably, in his assassination. His choice of companions, these magnificent silk-clad snakes, perfectly reflects his character and the shocking tone of his rule. They symbolize his decadence, his rejection of Roman tradition, and his fascination with the bizarre. You stand there sensing the cool, unsettling presence of these adorned reptiles, recognizing that even the most outrageously indulgent of emperors found a unique form of companionship in the silent, shimmering elegance of his slithering pets. Leaving the bewildering spectacle of Elagabalus's silk-clad snakes, you now step into the contrasting, more refined world of his cousin and successor, Alexander Severus. Ascending the throne as a young intellectual ruler, guided by his mother and grandmother, Alexander Severus sought to restore a sense of dignity and scholarship to the empire after the chaos of Elagabalus. And reflecting his more cultivated tastes, his chosen companions were often the delicate and melodious inhabitants of his aviary of songbirds. Right. Imagine yourself in a serene, sunlit courtyard within the imperial palace, perhaps a hidden garden filled with flowering plants and flowing water. The air is alive not with the raucous squawks of parrots or the aggressive calls of wild beasts, but with the gentle chirping, trilling, and melodious songs of a multitude of small birds. You see intricately designed bird cages, perhaps fashioned from delicate bronze, or woven reeds housing a variety of songbirds, finches, nightingales, canaries if they were known at the time, and other species prized for their vocal talents. These weren't kept for status display or violent entertainment. They were cherished for their beauty and their music, reflecting Alexander Severus's more intellectual and artistic sensibilities. The mainstream historical fact here is that Romans, particularly the cultured elite, appreciated birds for their songs and kept them in aviaries or smaller cages, especially those with pleasant voices. The quirky tidbit, however, is Alexander Severus's particular dedication to creating a peaceful musical environment, with his songbirds suggesting a deep personal appreciation for their artistry. You can almost feel the light flutter of their wings as they flit from perch to perch and hear the clear, complex melodies echoing through the quiet garden, a soothing balm to the stresses of imperial rule. Historians still argue whether Alexander Severus's scholarly and artistic interests were entirely innate or carefully cultivated by his female relatives who effectively ruled through him. Regardless, his reign was marked by a return to intellectual pursuits and cultural refinement. You might picture Alexander Severus perhaps studying philosophy or discussing literature, finding a moment of genuine peace as he listened to his birds. Their constant natural music would have provided a welcome contrast to the often discordant political realities of the Roman court. It's a subtle form of companionship, isn't it? One based purely on aesthetic pleasure and gentle presence. The care given to these songbirds would have been meticulous. They would have required specialized diets, clean water, and carefully maintained environments to thrive and sing their best. This level of dedication to such delicate creatures speaks to a refined taste and a nurturing spirit, a far cry from the violent indulgence of his predecessor. Think of the quiet joy these simple sounds could bring to an emperor, a brief escape from the weight of the world, reminding him of the natural beauty and harmony that existed beyond the palace intrigues. Alexander Severus's reign, though ultimately ending tragically, was a period of attempted restoration and cultural renaissance. His choice of companions, these beautiful melodious songbirds, perfectly reflects his character and the aspirations of his rule, peaceful, intellectual, and refined. They symbolize his gentle nature, his appreciation for the arts, and his desire to bring harmony back to the empire. You stand there hearing the phantom chorus of their joyful songs, recognizing that even the most well-intentioned of emperors found a unique form of companionship in the subtle living symphony of his cherished aviary. Leaving the melodious aviary of Alexander Severus, you are thrust into the tumultuous reign of Maximinus Thrax. Rising from humble Thracian origins to become emperor through sheer military might, Maximinus was a colossal figure both physically and in his impact. His rule was defined by military campaigns and a disdain for the Roman Senate, and mirroring his imposing presence and martial focus, his most crucial companions were his powerful war horses. Imagine yourself not in a delicate garden, but on a windswept battlefield, or a rugged military encampment on the empire's frontiers. The air is alive with the scent of leather horse sweat and the faint metallic tang of arms. You see enormous horses, their muscles rippling under their coats, their powerful legs capable of carrying a heavily armored rider into the thick of battle. These aren't just mounts. They are extensions of the emperor himself, embodying his strength, his relentless drive, and his unwavering military focus. For Maximinus, who rarely set foot in Rome, these horses were his most constant and indispensable companions. The mainstream historical fact here is that cavalry was a crucial component of Roman legions, and emperors, especially those with military backgrounds, relied heavily on powerful horses for transport and battle. The quirky tidbit, however, is the almost legendary connection between Maximinus and his personal war horses. While he wouldn't have kept them as pets in a domestic sense, the bond between a general and his mount in ancient warfare was profound, bordering on spiritual. You can almost feel the powerful surge of energy as a war horse charges its breath, snorting its hooves, pounding the earth, a living force of nature, under the emperor's command. Historians still argue whether the accounts of Maximinus's immense size and strength were entirely accurate or exaggerated by chroniclers to underscore his barbarian origins and formidable nature. Regardless, his life was one of constant campaigning, and his horses were central to his existence. You might picture Maximinus, a man of few words and immense physical presence, communicating with his favored steed through subtle commands, a silent understanding, forged in countless battles. Their loyalty was absolute, their strength unwavering, and their reliability unmatched by any human courtier. These war horses were meticulously cared for, their diet, training, and equipment paramount to the emperor's success and survival. They were living fortresses capable of carrying the heaviest armor and delivering devastating charges. Their power and endurance would have perfectly complemented Maximinus's own legendary stamina and martial prowess. It's a bond of mutual necessity and respect, where the animal's life is as valuable as any human's on the battlefield. You can almost hear the rhythmic clatter of hooves on distant roads, a constant reminder of the emperor's mobile military-centric rule. Maximinus Thrax's reign was short, brutal, and ended in mutiny. His choice of companions, these powerful, indispensable war horses, perfectly reflects his character and the uncompromising tone of his rule, militaristic, unrefined, and constantly on the move. They symbolize his physical strength, his unwavering focus on conquest, and his disdain for the comforts of traditional imperial life. You stand there sensing the formidable presence of these equine titans, recognizing that even the most battle-hardened of emperors found a unique form of companionship in the loyal, untiring power of his four-legged comrades in arms. Moving from the thunderous hooves of Maximinus Thrax's war horses, you find yourself in a far gentler yet equally tragic interlude, the reign of Gordian IV. Ascending the throne as a mere 13-year-old boy after the tumultuous year of the six emperors, Gordian III was a puppet emperor guided by advisors but possessing a surprising personal tenderness. And reflecting his youthful innocence and benevolent spirit, his chosen companions were a herd of gentle gazelles. Imagine yourself in a vast, sun-drenched, private garden within the imperial palace, one designed more for peaceful contemplation than grand displays. The air is soft, perhaps scented with herbs, and instead of the aggressive roars of big cats or the formal cooing of doves, you hear the delicate rustle of hooves on grass and the occasional soft bleat. You see a herd of graceful gazelles, their slender legs and elegant forms moving with effortless agility, their large dark eyes observing the world with a trusting curiosity. These weren't kept for sport or food. They were living embodiments of grace and innocence, cherished by a young emperor burdened by an empire's weight. The mainstream historical fact here is that gazelles and similar deer were known in the Roman world, particularly from North Africa and the Near East, and were sometimes kept in large private parks vivarii by the wealthy for their beauty or as a source of game. The quirky tidbit, however, is the specific and deeply personal affection of young Gordian III for these gentle creatures. While detailed historical accounts are sparse, the image of a child emperor finding solace in such delicate animals is a poignant one, hinting at a genuine innocence. You can almost feel the soft, velvety muzzle of a gazelle as it cautiously approaches you, its breath warm on your hand, its fearlessness a testament to the peaceful environment it inhabits. Historians still argue whether Gordian III's reputation for gentleness and his apparent love for animals were entirely accurate, or partly a narrative constructed by later historians who favored a more benevolent image of an emperor, especially one so young. Regardless, the tale resonates. You might picture Gordian III, overwhelmed by the duties of his high office, slipping away to the quiet of his garden, finding a profound, uncomplicated comfort in the company of his gazelles. Their quiet presence, their graceful movements, and their innocent trust would have been a stark contrast to the complex, treacherous world of Roman politics he was forced to inhabit. The care of these gazelles would have been meticulous, requiring vast grazing areas, dedicated handlers, and protection from predators, both animal and human, given the dangers of the Roman court. It speaks to a gentler side of imperial power, one focused on nurturing rather than dominating. Think of the quiet joy these creatures could bring to a lonely child emperor, a simple escape into the purity of nature. It's a touching image, isn't it? A young boy burdened with the rule of the world finding peace in the soft presence of a trusting animal. Gordian III's reign, though relatively long for the Christ of the 3rd century, was marked by his youth and ultimately ended mysteriously on a campaign in Persia. His choice of companions, these gentle, trusting gazelles, perfectly reflects his character and the poignant tone of his rule, innocent, benevolent, and ultimately vulnerable. They symbolize his youth, his quiet nature, and the fragility of peace in a turbulent era. You stand there hearing the phantom rustle of hooves and the soft breath of these beautiful creatures, recognizing that even the most powerful child emperor found a unique form of companionship in the quiet, graceful presence of his beloved herd. From the gentle innocence of Gordian III's gazelles, you shift to the dynamic and culturally rich reign of Philip the Arab. An emperor of humble Syrian origins, Philip rose through the ranks to seize the throne, famously presiding over Rome's magnificent Millennium Games, celebrating the city's 1000th anniversary. Reflecting his desert heritage and his journey, his chosen companions were often his prized camel caravan, some serving as personal pets. Imagine yourself outside the bustling city of Rome, perhaps on a vast training ground, or a dedicated imperial estate designed for large animals. The air is warm and dry, perhaps carrying the faint earthy scent of the desert. You see not just a few, but a significant number of majestic camels, their humps rising proudly, their long necks swaying as they move with an inherent dignity. These aren't merely beasts of burden. Some are clearly favored, meticulously cared for, almost members of the imperial household, reflecting Philip's pride in his origins and his connection to the vast desert lands. The mainstream historical fact here is that camels were crucial animals for trade and travel in the eastern parts of the Roman Empire, and were certainly known and utilized in Rome for spectacles or as exotic displays. The quirky tidbit, however, is Philip the Arab's personal connection to and apparent affection for these camels, elevating them beyond mere utility to a form of cherished companion, symbolizing his roots and perhaps providing a comforting link to his homeland. You can almost feel the rough, leathery texture of their fur and hear the soft, gurgling sounds they make, a reminder of far-off lands brought to the heart of the empire. Historians still argue whether Philip's embrace of his Arabian heritage, including his association with camels, was a genuine cultural affinity or a calculated move to gain support from the eastern provinces. Regardless, the presence of these animals would have been a striking visual. You might picture Philip, a man who navigated the treacherous world of Roman politics, finding a peculiar form of solace and familiarity in the unhurried, steadfast presence of his camels. They represented reliability and endurance, qualities he undoubtedly valued in his own rise to power. These camels would have been more than just a novelty. They were a living testament to Philip's origins and the diverse nature of the Roman Empire. They would have required specialized care, perhaps even handlers brought directly from the East who understood their needs and temperaments. Think of the immense logistical challenge of maintaining a camel caravan in Italy, far from their natural habitat. It speaks to a deep personal connection or a profound desire to showcase his unique heritage. You can almost hear the soft padding of their cushioned feet on the earth, their large, calm eyes observing the unfamiliar Roman landscape. Philip the Arab's reign, though ultimately ending in military defeat, was a period of significant public display and celebration. His choice of companions, these magnificent camels, perfectly reflects his character and the proud, culturally distinct tone of his rule. They symbolize his heritage, his practical strength, and his ability to bridge the gap between East and West. You stand there sensing the enduring presence of these desert giants, recognizing that even the most powerful of emperors found a unique form of companionship and a connection to his roots in the steady familiar presence of his camel caravan. Moving from the enduring presence of Philip the Arab's camels, you now step into the twilight of imperial power with Diocletian. A formidable and revolutionary emperor, Diocletian rose from humble origins to rebuild the Roman Empire after the chaos of the 3rd century crisis, establishing the Tetrarchy, and ultimately choosing to abdicate and retire. And in his self-imposed retirement far from the machinations of Rome, he found solace in an unexpected hobby, tending to his vineyards, often accompanied by his vineyard vipers. Imagine yourself not in a grand palace, but in the serene, sun-drenched countryside near Salona in modern-day Croatia, where Diocletian built his immense fortified palace. The air is warm, fragrant with ripening grapes and the earthy scent of the soil. You hear the gentle hum of insects and perhaps the subtle, dry rustle of scales. You see Diocletian himself no longer clad in imperial purple, but in simple gardener's attire, meticulously tending to his vines, and occasionally slithering silently through the rows of grapes or vipers, not necessarily pets in the cuddly sense, but a natural, acknowledged, and perhaps even respected presence in his agricultural haven. The mainstream historical fact here is that Diocletian famously abdicated the throne, a highly unusual act for a Roman emperor, and retired to cultivate cabbages and grapes. The quirky tidbit, however, is the implicit or explicit presence of vipers in his vineyards and his pragmatic, almost symbiotic relationship with them. While he certainly wasn't cuddling them, his peaceful coexistence with these venomous snakes speaks to a man who understood and respected the natural order, even its dangerous elements. You can almost feel the dry heat of the earth as a viper camouflaged amongst the leaves coils, silently its forked tongue flickering. Historians still argue whether Diocletian's dedication to his gardening and his disinterest in returning to power was purely philosophical, a genuine love for a simpler life, or a calculated political statement on the burdens of emperorship. Regardless, his contentment in retirement, famously stating he could show those who urged him to return to power, the cabbages he had grown with his own hands, speaks volumes. You might picture Diocletian, a man who once commanded legions and reorganized an empire, finding a strange satisfaction in the rhythms of agricultural life, sharing his domain with the silent, watchful vipers who helped keep rodent populations in check. These vipers, while potentially dangerous, were a natural part of the vineyard ecosystem. They were not pampered or adorned like Elagabalus's snakes. Rather, they represented a practical aspect of his new grounded life. Their presence would have required a degree of cautious respect, rather than fear, embodying the idea that even in retirement, vigilance was necessary. It's a subtle form of companionship, isn't it? One based on mutual if unspoken agreement within a shared environment. You can almost hear the faint rustle of their movements through the dry leaves, a constant living reminder of the untamed natural world that he embraced in his golden years. Diocletian's retirement marked a profound shift in imperial history, a deliberate step away from power. His connection to his vineyards, and by extension, his pragmatic acceptance of their natural venomous inhabitants, perfectly reflects his character and the enduring legacy of his rule one of order, self-sufficiency, and a profound understanding of life's practicalities. He was an emperor who found peace not in grand displays but in the quiet, productive rhythms of the land, sharing his tranquil haven with even its more dangerous yet useful residents. From the quiet agrarian retirement of Diocletian and his vineyard vipers, you now move forward into a pivotal era for Rome, marked by the rise of Constantine the Great. His reign ushered in a new age, shifting the empire's focus eastward, establishing Constantinople and crucially embracing Christianity. This profound religious transformation subtly influenced every aspect of imperial life, including, as you might imagine, the choice and perception of pets, his Christian critters. Imagine yourself in a grand newly built basilica or a sprawling imperial residence adorned with Christian symbols, a marked departure from the pagan imagery of old. The air feels different, infused with a sense of purpose and divine favor. You see not the exotic, often aggressive beasts of earlier pagan emperors, but rather animals that embody qualities cherished within the burgeoning Christian ethos, doves, symbolizing peace and the Holy Spirit. lambs representing innocence and sacrifice, perhaps even fish a secret symbol for early Christians. These aren't just pets. They are living allegories reflecting Constantine's new faith and his desire to align the imperial household with Christian values. The mainstream historical fact here is Constantine's conversion to Christianity and his subsequent promotion of the religion throughout the empire, profoundly impacting Roman culture and art. The quirky tidbit, however, is the subtle yet significant shift in imperial pet keeping to reflect these new Christian sensibilities. While direct historical records rarely detail specific Christian pets, with names the general atmosphere of the court would have gravitated towards animals that held positive Christian symbolism. You can almost feel the gentle flutter of doves or the soft bleating of a lamb, a profound sense of tranquility and purity emanating from these creatures. Historians still argue whether Constantine's conversion was a genuine spiritual awakening or a shrewd political maneuver to unify a fractured empire under a new divine banner. Regardless, the impact was undeniable. You might picture Constantine, the powerful emperor, who saw the Chi-Rho symbol in a vision before battle, finding a quiet moment of reflection in the presence of these animals. They would have offered a sense of peace and purity, a calming influence amidst the weighty decisions of state and the lingering tensions between old pagan traditions and the new faith. The care for these Christian critters would have been one of benevolence, reflecting the Christian emphasis on compassion for all living things. These were not animals for spectacle or violence, but for contemplation and gentle companionship. Their presence in the imperial household would have been a quiet yet powerful statement of the new imperial identity. Think of the contrast: no more gladiatorial lions in the private chambers, but symbols of peace and innocence. It's a profound cultural shift reflected even in the emperor's choice of animal companions. Constantine's reign was a watershed moment in Roman history, marking the end of the classical pagan world and the beginning of the Christian empire. His choice of companions, these gentle symbolic Christian critters, perfectly reflects his character and the transformative tone of his rule. They symbolize his new faith, his aspiration for a more peaceful and divinely guided empire, and the profound changes sweeping across Roman society. You stand there sensing the serene presence of these animals, recognizing that even the most powerful of emperors found a unique form of companionship in the living symbols of his world-changing belief. From the religiously symbolic pets of Constantine, you now fast forward to the fascinating and ultimately futile attempt to revive paganism under Julian the Apostate. This highly intellectual and ascetic emperor, a nephew of Constantine, passionately rejected Christianity and sought to return the empire to its Hellenic philosophical roots. Unsurprisingly, his choice of companions reflected his scholarly pursuits and his love for ancient wisdom, his philosopher's parrots. Imagine yourself in Julian's private study, perhaps in his beloved city of Antioch rather than Rome. The room is filled with scrolls, maps, and the faint scent of ink. Instead of the gentle cooing of doves or the silent presence of pious lambs, you hear intelligent squawks, perhaps even fragmented phrases of Greek philosophy or snippets of classical poetry. You see parrots not just for their colorful plumage, but for their renowned ability to mimic human speech. These weren't mere decorative birds. They were living embodiments of Julian's intellectual pursuits, perhaps even perceived as companions in his endless philosophical debates. The mainstream historical fact here is that parrots were prized by the Romans for their ability to speak, and intellectuals often enjoyed their mimicry, sometimes teaching them complex phrases. The quirky tidbit, however, is Julian the Apostate's specific affinity for these talking birds, suggesting he used them as more than just amusement, perhaps as intellectual curiosities, or even as conversational partners in his solitary studies. You can almost hear a parrot squawk, "Know thyself," or "Virtue is its own reward," followed by a proud ruffle of its feathers, mimicking phrases it often heard from its learned master. Historians still argue whether Julian's ascetic lifestyle and his intellectual fervor were genuine or partly a reaction against the perceived decadence of Christian emperors. Regardless, his devotion to philosophy was absolute. You might picture Julian, a man constantly engaged in deep thought and writing voluminous works, pausing his studies to interact with his parrots. Perhaps he found a strange comfort in their ability to repeat the very wisdom he sought to revive, or simply enjoyed the challenge of teaching them complex ideas. Their non-judgmental repetition would have been a unique form of companionship for a man increasingly isolated by his controversial beliefs. The care for these philosophers' parrots would have gone beyond mere feeding. It would have involved constant interaction, patient teaching, and a genuine engagement with their intelligence. Their presence in his study would have underscored his commitment to learning and his reverence for the great thinkers of antiquity. Think of the intellectual playfulness these birds could inspire, a rare moment of levity for an emperor, burdened by the immense task of reversing a powerful cultural tide. It's a charming image, isn't it? An emperor trying to teach his parrot stoic maxims. Julian the Apostate's reign, though ultimately ending in military failure, and his death was a vibrant attempt to roll back the tide of Christianity and restore the intellectual and religious traditions of pagan Greece and Rome. His choice of companions, these intelligent, talkative philosophers' parrots, perfectly reflects his character and the fervent intellectual tone of his rule. They symbolize his scholarly pursuits, his devotion to ancient wisdom, and his desire to rekindle the flame of classical thought. You stand there hearing the phantom echoes of their learned squawks, recognizing that even the most determined of emperors found a unique form of companionship in the clever, imitative minds of his feathered intellectual partners. From the intellectual squawks of Julian's philosopher's parrots, you arrive at the very end of our imperial journey, at the poignant figure of Romulus Augustulus. Often considered the last Western Roman emperor, his reign, if it can be called, that was a mere formality, a powerless puppet show overseen by barbarian generals. And in this fading twilight of an empire, even the imperial pets were reduced to a quiet, almost melancholic presence, his last lizard. Imagine yourself not in a grand, bustling palace, but in a small, perhaps crumbling villa in Ravenna, the de facto capital of the Western Empire in its final days. The air is still heavy with the dust of ages, and a sense of profound quiet hangs over everything. You don't see legions of exotic animals or magnificent beasts. Instead, perhaps, basking on a sun-warmed stone or darting silently among forgotten artifacts is a solitary lizard. This isn't a symbol of power or a creature of spectacle. It's a small, unassuming reptile, a quiet, almost forgotten companion to a boy, emperor whose reign was merely an echo of past glory. The mainstream historical fact here is that Romulus Augustulus was indeed the last Western Roman emperor, a child who was deposed in 476 CE, marking the traditional end of the Western Roman Empire. The quirky tidbit, however, is the image of such a humble solitary pet accompanying him in those final powerless days. While no specific historical account names Romulus Augustulus's pet lizard, the presence of such a quiet, unpretentious companion perfectly encapsulates the diminished state of the empire itself. You can almost feel the dry, cool texture of the stone the lizard basks on and see its tiny, ancient eyes watching the world with detached patience. Historians still argue whether the end of the Western Roman Empire was a sudden collapse or a gradual, long-term transformation. But for Romulus Augustulus, it was a quiet, personal end to 1,000 years of imperial tradition. You might picture the young emperor, a boy with little real authority, finding a strange solace in the silent companionship of his lizard. There were no grand ceremonies, no roaring crowds, no political intrigues to navigate for this emperor. Only the slow passage of time and perhaps the quiet, unblaming presence of a small reptile. Its simple needs, its silent movements, its ancient, unchanging nature would have been a profound contrast to the weight of a dying empire resting on a child's shoulders. This last lizard, almost certainly a common species found in Italy, represents the scaling back of imperial ambition, the return to the mundane. It wasn't acquired from far-off lands at great expense. It was simply there, a part of the local environment. Its presence speaks to a kind of quiet acceptance, a resignation to the natural order of things, much like the empire itself was slowly fading into history. Think of the simplicity of its companionship, no demands, no expectations, just a silent, enduring presence. It's a poignant image of companionship in an era of decline. Romulus Augustulus's deposition brought an end to an era. His choice of companion, this humble, quiet, last lizard, perfectly reflects his character and the subdued, melancholic tone of his non-reign. It symbolizes the empire's quiet end, the return to simplicity and the final fading whisper of Roman power. You stand there sensing the stillness, recognizing that even the very last of the Roman emperors found a unique form of companionship in the understated, enduring presence of a small, ancient creature, a final quiet breath before the curtain fell. The last rays of the ancient Roman sun now softly dim, casting long, gentle shadows across the historical landscape we've explored. You feel the weight of centuries lift from your shoulders, replaced by a quiet calm. The emperors, with their grand ambitions and peculiar affections, are now just whispers on the wind. Their passions and their power faded into the mists of time. You've journeyed through their private worlds, witnessed their strange bonds with creatures great and small, and perhaps understood a little more about the human heart even when encased in imperial purple. Let the quiet settle in, allow the echoes of ancient roars and gentle coos to soften into silence. Your mind, now rich with forgotten tales and surprising connections, can finally drift. The grand spectacle of history recedes, leaving only peace. Rest deeply knowing that even in the vastness of time, the simple comforts endure.